Okay. Thanks. Carry on.
Okay.
We're recording it now?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Finding my wife was the most beneficial part of my Wheaton education. Now we've got
The first thing.
Yeah, all right. That's recorded. That's okay.
Actually, I can probably take it from Wheaton because that was kind of a pivotal role in the story of Liquid Church. I grew up in a very small church in Clifton. It was a non-denominational Bible church of about 110 people. It was called Grace Church. And
Can I ask who the pastor was at the time?
Glenn Felty, Reverend Glenn Felty.
Okay. My uncle Lloyd Fesmeyer was the pastor there
Oh,
in the 60s.
60s. Okay, yeah. So this is
I know that church too.
Yeah, late
Wow,
70s. early
6
80s.
degrees. I mean,
Yeah,
2
crazy.
degrees of separation with you two.
It was interesting, though, because it was really, however, around the age of like 15 or 16. I think that a lot of, high schools kind of get restless, going through the motions of faith. And so I was excited to go off to college. And Wheaton, even though it's a, Christian school, liberal arts, I was an English major there. So I don't actually, I was not planning for the pastorate. And in fact, people would say, well, what do you want to do? Are you going to teach high school English or something? I said, no. I said, do you want to be a pastor? Because at Wheaton, you have to take, some Bible and theology foundation. And I said, no. And of course, my first job was teaching high school English in Summit, New Jersey. And second was becoming pastor of Liquid Church. But it really was a circuitous God route that he had, just knowing my own weaknesses and latent gifts I don't think I fully understood at that time. When I went out to Wheaton, I really, as an evangelical school, they've got, chapel every other day. You got Willow Creek. You got some of these mega churches, a church on every corner. It's kind of like the buckle of the Bible Belt. And I honestly kind of dropped out. I'm the accidental pastor. This is the interesting piece because I grew up really, filling in the blanks. We took notes in church, on the, the homily or the message. And by the age of 15, I, had kind of figured out, okay, so there's always going to be 3 points to every message. It was kind of a Baptist teaching, so it was like it was going to spell something or be some sort of acrostic, And it felt like a very fill-in-the-blanks, paint-by-number kind of faith. And when I went out to Wheaton, I met my wife, Colleen. Now, she grew up in a storefront Pentecostal church in the Bronx.
I didn't know that.
Yes, you wouldn't guess that, right?
No.
Guess that about her. Yeah, she's a city girl.
Yeah.
That was very intriguing to me. I didn't know it at the time, but when I called her up actually at Wheaton for a date, that was kind of our first thing. I said, we'll go out Friday night. And she said, actually, I'm busy this Friday. I'm going to be in prison. And I was like, wow, I've been turned down before. I've never heard that excuse. She said, oh, no, I do tutoring in prison. I do prison ministry. And I was like, what? Because our church was very a closed circle. It was very much, I joke about it now. I used to call it the frozen chosen. These were God, we were kind of a holy huddle. It was the same 110 people. Maybe 1 or 2 people passed away, but somebody had a baby. And so there was this kind of replacement growth. But nobody would come in. Outsiders, new converts, that wasn't even a thought that people had. It was like, well, maybe you'd be born into that family and replacement growth.
You're describing Grace Church in Clifton now?
Correct.
Right, okay.
My non-denominational Bible church.
Yeah.
Then I met Colleen, and I said, well, who is this attractive young lady who spent her Fridays tutoring, inmates?
Looks like we have someone joining us.
Hi, it's Javier. I just joined.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Tim, I should let you know, Javier is the dean of the Drew Divinity School. So he's jumped on the line. He's not on video, but he's going to listen in. So,
Hey, Javier, nice to talk with you in person.
Yes, sorry I can't see you, but hopefully that'll happen soon.
That's okay. I'm actually, we probably have seen each other. I often hide away in the stacks at Drew.
I know. I see you. You're often like writing and studying and doing things. I've seen you too.
So just recounting a little bit, it's just kind of the journey of Liquid Church. Larry and I just realized we're both Wheaton College alumni and met our wives there. And that was actually how Liquid began. Because when I met Colleen, who was from the Bronx, a Pentecostal storefront church, that really collided with my more insular, Holy Huddle, Bible church. I grew up in a small Bible church in Clifton, New Jersey, about 100, 110 people, something like that. And so I went home with her. I remember her very distinctly on break from Wheaton. And it was the opposite of my experience. My upbringing was the frozen chosen, no spontaneity, everything's in order, everything's fill in the blank. And then I went with her on Thanksgiving break to this Pentecostal storefront church in the Bronx, where honestly, I couldn't even discern that there was any discernible liturgy. There's a guy up there with an acoustic guitar, and he putting on different, remember those overheads like on a projector, with a Sharpie on it, and we'd sing half the chorus, then he would change it. And I said to Colleen, I think this guy's us. And she said, oh no, we call that following the Spirit. And I said, I call it disorganized, where I come from. And, for a little bit, I was, I just had my nose in the air a little bit about it. And then the pastor gave a fairly rambling message that, really had no discernible homiletical structure. And I'm kind of sitting there, shaking my head. Where's the theology? Where's the notes? Where's the order of service? And then he kind of gives this invitation, well, you know that there are people here today who maybe you've never been in church before. You never heard that God loves you, that Christ can make you a new creation. I'll give you the chance to accept Christ right now. Become a Christian. I was like, wow, this guy's going for it. He's giving a classic kind of, Billy Graham altar call, as it were. And I was like, well, that'll be interesting. This was so disorganized and chaotic. And so he says, so if that's you, you want to give your life over to Jesus Christ and become a Christian, I want you to come on down right now. And I was like, well, certainly no one's going to walk up. 16 people walk up. And I'm looking like, I didn't even know there were 16 people. I assumed these were the same people every week. 2 of them were drug dealers who walked in because they had a storefront church. So the doors were open to the church, and they just walked in. And they had previous experience because they had like a soup kitchen and like a pantry and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, well, this is fascinating. And so he leads them kind of into prayer, and they says, and you know what? We're going to have baptisms right now. Drew, get back up here. And then the kid with the guitar and the, fumbling through his overheads gets back up there. And I'm like, what is going on here? And they're clapping and, tambourines. And I used to joke with Colleen, I was like, if my church was the frozen chosen, hers were the happy clappy. This was like, totally disorganized, classic Pentecostal kind of thing. Well, the bottom line is it was one of the most beautiful things I ever saw. After that service, her mother said, well, Tim, you're coming over. So this is the first time I went to church with my wife. You're coming over for lunch. But guess who's else is coming over for lunch? These 2 new brothers in Christ. And had those 2, dealers come over her house for lunch. And I was like, okay, I went to church for 18 years. We went Sunday morning to Sunday school, Sunday morning to the adult service. We went to the Sunday evening service where they were preaching exegetically from the book of, Leviticus for 9 years. Then we'd go to, Monday prayer meeting, Wednesday youth group. I can't think of one time in 2 decades that I saw 2 people who'd really never been to church come in, hear the message of God's love, and clearly some way that resonated and was relevant with their life, were welcomed into the body life of the church, and now they're coming over for dinner. It shocked me and absolutely undid me because I said, this is part of the gospel that I thought was history. That happened in the book of Acts. But that doesn't really happen today, right? And I saw it come alive. I said, you know what? There's something incredibly powerful about this because that was the impact of Jesus going to people in the margins, going to the disempowered. It was the publicans and the, prostitutes who often were very, very attracted to him in a winsome way. And so when Colleen and I got married, we moved back here to New Jersey. And we said, could we have the best of both worlds, though? Because I was very grateful for the strong Bible and theological teaching and training of my evangelical upbringing. But Colleen had this incredibly compassionate, outreach-oriented, externally focused experience. And we said, could we bring the best of both worlds together? And that's how Liquid Church was born.
Huh. That's amazing.
And this was, sounds like it was a vision of you and your wife.
It was, but I can only say that with retrospect. You use that word vision. We have a very, clear vision now to saturate the state with the gospel of Jesus Christ. But at the time, we knew we were part of a different generation, Generation X. And so we came back and started looking for a church that really had that kind of social justice ethos, but was anchored biblically. And honestly, there were not a ton of them. I think we could count on one hand, the amount of actually thriving, vibrant churches in New Jersey that were reaching our generation, Generation X. Typically, we would go to, we stopped in many. We stopped in Presbyterian, Methodist, Episcopal. We made the rounds. And they were either strong in one area. We're, very, very strong in tradition. We have a rooted history of 250 years. But then there was a very atrophied engagement wing with the community. Or it was all community-oriented. We have a soup kitchen, clothes pantry, all these things. And we would go on Sunday morning, and the teaching was irrelevant to Monday morning. And so we ended up going to a small church at the time, church plant in Manhattan called Redeemer Presbyterian Church with a little unknown preacher named Tim Keller at the time.
Oh my God, that's right. Okay.
Yeah. So that was a church plant of about 250 people. We met in Hunter College. And so Colleen and I would go in every Sunday, pay at the Lincoln Tunnel and then, drive and pay $20 for parking. And we were absolutely blown away because it was the first time we ever saw a model of ministry. Tim Keller is he's the C.S. Lewis of the 21st century. First-rate academic mind, but then he would take the New York Times and all of the issues of the day and synthesize the two, really bring the Bible and the newspaper together. And that was the first time I ever saw model ministry. I said, well, now I could see myself doing that. I could give myself to that. And so Colleen became very involved there in the homeless ministry because she was working in New York. But I was teaching high school English. And that's really how the Lord prepared me for the pastorate. Because if you can teach 17-year-olds Macbeth, keep them interested, you can, but that's actually where I learned a little bit about using technology. So if you come to Liquid today and you see a lot of video and graphics and social media, that's really the way the Lord helped train me. Because if I had went to seminary right out of Wheaton, I don't think I had the right heart attitude. I wouldn't have been in it for the right reasons.
Can I ask a question? Unless Javier, you have a question that you wanted to ask Tim?
I do, but go ahead.
No, go ahead.
We can all jump in some way.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I was just I was interested in the Redeemer experience because I actually wrote my thesis on Redeemer and on Tim Keller's development of that congregation, and I wonder how much of that model continues to inform your project, and where have you potentially either parted ways or expanded or changed what that model was for you early on?
Sure. Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, incredible, right? To be able. Were you actually in the congregation, Javier, or you just kind of observed?
No, I was serving a congregation. I was serving at Christ Church, which was Redeemer met in Christ Church for a while, and
Sure.
And they did all of their weddings there, and so I had a lot of interaction with them, and that's how I became connected. But then they were just up the road on Park Avenue when they were at Hunter, so that's how I knew of them.
Yeah, I think, so to answer your question, so Tim Keller kind of inspired, originally, there was nothing called Liquid. There wasn't any particular vision that my wife and I had. It was the first time we were exposed to something where it was reaching 20-somethings. And what I loved about it is he had a way of preaching and ministering the word where he took what we were talking about on Sunday morning and instantly connected it to what we had been talking about at dinner on Saturday night when we went out with friends. And so there wasn't this, a lot of times there's this big drop off between like Sunday morning and Monday morning, it's like we kind of do our worship thing over here, but then the real issues we're dealing with, 20-something, a lot of 20-something issues, identity, career, sex, money, relationships, all these topics, what we actually talk about with friends. When we go out to dinner over a glass of wine, we don't really talk about that on Sunday morning. That's the religious stuff. And he just blurred the line between the two in a beautiful way. And we said, now we are really interested in this because we feel like we could invite our friends to this. and they wouldn't be intellectually insulted because Tim Keller doesn't, he shows you don't have to check your brain at the door to be a Christian. And then secondly, there was a social justice ethic at Redeemer at the time that was all about how is your faith really causing you to spend yourself, stewardship of your life, not just making money, but engaging with the homeless, engaging with the poor. What do we have to learn from them? And that was extremely attractive to us. I think it was to a lot of Gen X at the time, still is to millennials. It's really our leading form of evangelism at Liquid. But to answer your question directly, what do we continue to use wherever we parted ways? Redeemer is really more of a high church experience. There's a liturgy. They do a beautiful job out of it. Any given Sunday, you might have a, string quartet, and they're talking about a Bach concerto, in the evening and linking it to the Psalms. Just beautiful thinking. I'm not that smart. So we kind of are a little bit more, we cast a little bit broader net. And so we're more of, I don't want to use like Willow Creek or North Point Church as an example. However, that style of worship, probably what, Bill Hybels called in the 80s, seeker friendly. I don't see a dichotomy between reaching people who are new to faith and then people who have been there, grown up in church their whole life. I think relevant teaching should transcend that. People should be able to come in, hear from God, apply it to their life. So we began, my wife and I, after Redeemer, they started a second congregation and then a third. And so Liquid is a multi-site church. That was our first time that we had seen that. But we're very different. So we use video. We broadcast the Sunday teaching via video. Everything else is live. So there's a campus pastor for spiritual care. There's small group ministries. There's a live worship team. There's live disciple. There's all the elements you'd have, except for that when it comes to the message. We beam that in and use video because that's how we keep consistency of vision across all of our campuses, or maybe what you might call parishes. Whereas Redeemer, I don't know if you saw this, Tim Keller, kind of with his retirement, they just made the decision to actually spin off those campuses now as their own independent congregations with their own preacher.
Oh, I haven't seen that.
Yeah, that was a big seismic moment in the multi-site conversation because Tim Keller did it and Matt Chandler down in Texas did it as well with the Village Church. They had 5 or 6 congregations, but they had always done live preaching. They all had their own board of elders who kind of, operated the church, managed the church. And now they're saying, you know what? They have the maturity that we don't want to just have a galvanizing figure like Keller, who, by the way, who are you going to replace him with? I mean, 1 in a million kind of thing. And so they said they're healthy and stable enough. And New York has distinct enough neighborhoods culturally, whereas the worship in Hell's Kitchen looks very different than the worship in the West Village. And so they said, we believe for the long-term health, we want to have a network of churches. So they actually kind of cut them off in a good way. I mean, kind of snipped the umbilical cord and said, you're on your own. Of course, you'll have all the full support. And we're a family. We're sisters and brothers in Christ. But there's now not a formal, they're no longer one church with multiple locations. They're many churches.
So were they under kind of a diocese, or are they, we call it a diocese, but is there an organizing?
Yeah. So they were under the presbytery.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I think they were PCUSA. I always get them confused.
Okay.
They were under that, but then they had
PCA.
PCA. Yeah.
Right.
I always
Okay.
confused America or PCUSA. PCA. And so they sent those independently, whereas our parishes or campuses we're just one church with multiple locations.
Okay.
More of a franchise model. And that's, again, neither right nor wrong. We don't really ascribe any kind of, moral value to it. It's just a model that, we've chosen, that our vision is to kind of saturate the state. So our goal is to have a campus, a Liquid campus in every county. So we have 6 campuses now. Our ultimate goal will be to have 21 campuses, a campus in every county, so that everyone in New Jersey within a 30-minute drive can attend on Sundays.
So Javier, did you finish your question?
Yeah, that was it.
Okay. So Tim, one of the things that is driving this effort is, and it's, we're very grateful at Grace Church, we don't have this problem in Madison. We have the problem where we're probably more like that huddle that you talked about, where we kind of all come together and don't really leave the church and do anything.
Okay.
But a lot of the churches in the diocese really don't have enough people. So it was interesting that you started off with this you didn't have any locations. You were in churches and schools and renting space. And now you have decided to build out your beautiful location in Parsippany. But it was interesting how that was not your original, like you almost did it backwards. Like we have these buildings and have to figure out a way to either bring more people into the buildings, or we have to sort of let go of the buildings a little bit, versus you now went from no buildings to buildings. So how did you manage that transition, and what do you think is important about that for the faith journey of the church?
Yeah, so like I said, I'm the accidental pastor. Liquid is the accidental church plant. We did everything in reverse. So essentially, after our time at Redeemer, there was it was becoming increasingly difficult for us to be involved in the body life of the community during the week. Sunday, fantastic. We'd spend all day in the city, but just very difficult to be involved in a community group or serving, et cetera, as you go on. And then we had kids, and it was like, we can't be driving into New York for church, right? As many people discover. So we said, you know what? We need to bloom where we're planted. There's no perfect churches out there. And so we went to a 150-year-old Baptist church in Basking Ridge called Millington Baptist Church. And honestly, weren't particularly engaged or impressed. We looked around there, about 8, mainly white hair, but 8 folks who looked like maybe they were in their 20s or something at the time. But we said, you know what, that we just got to be part of the solution. And so we started going there and started inviting our friends. And of course, they were kind of like, Millington Baptist Church. One of my coworkers at Summit High School said, "You go to Militant Baptist Church?" At least they're honest, They call themselves right, because it's not Wheaton, Illinois here, right? Like this is a very, they get their talking heads from CNN. They assume that's what it is. So we said, "Well, come and see," And so the pastor there said to Colleen and I, he found out we went to Wheaton. He said, "Hey, would you teach a Sunday school class for 20 minutes?" Very traditional Sunday school class. And just to show you what lack of vision we had, okay? If people come to our church and said, "Oh, this is an incredible vision. How did you all do this?" I was like, it's all the Lord's sense of humor. He said, "Could you teach a Sunday school class?" And we said, "Well, it depends. How early do we have to be there?"
Of course.
Right? And of course, he was so gracious. He said, usually we start at 9:30. And Colleen said, she'll tell you this, Callie. She said, "Well, we can't get there till 15:15. We got to go to Starbucks. So we're going to be late every Sunday."
Hey, it's honest.
And the Lord laughs. So but we started that class and we said, "Hey, all 20 somethings come." And they all did, all 8 of them. So our Liquid's first meeting was 10 people in this cinder block basement classroom with, fluorescent bulbs and bad coffee. And we said, we got nothing to lose. And so we threw out the curriculum. It was kind of like, fill in the blank kind of, study of blah, 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 blah. We just kind of threw it out. I said, "What do you guys want to talk about?" And that's when it kind of came to life. People were like, "Well, we talk about relationships. What specifically?" "Oh, dating." "Well, we talk about sex." "Okay, I'll bring a friend." And people started bringing their friends. And that little group, that Sunday school class of 10 for 20-somethings, suddenly, it's 20 people and 30 and then 40 people. And Colleen and I really co-taught it. I feel we just more facilitated conversations. But what was interesting is, as it outgrew that classroom, it got about 50 people, 60 people. And then the Baptist church was like, "Why is there so much noise coming, from that classroom?" And because we were laughing, having a good time. It was mainly other 20-somethings from the Christian churches in the areas because they had nothing going on for 20-somethings, the next generation. But we heard there's some, Gen X people at Millington Baptist Church. And so it was just transfer growth. It wasn't new people. And so we kind of had this dark night of the soul because coming from more evangelical orientation, we're like, I work with faculty here at Summit High School who I would never invite them to this. And I'm the guy leading it. And so we said, "Well, can we be honest? Why is that being?" And we're like, "Well, first off, it's in this, Millington Baptist Church, white steeple. People think it's Militant Baptist Church. that denominational allegiance, like we're post-denominational, makes no sense to them. 9:30 a.m. is a terrible time for, Gen X. Like, everyone's out the night before, they're not coming early. Everyone dresses in a suit and tie. It's super formal. They use all this, I'm in it. We use all this super formal insider language. Hello, brother, today's liturgy will be from, like, I'd have to bring a dictionary or have a pre-conversation with a friend. So, hey, just so you know, here's what's going to be weird. It's not going to happen. So we did something that, I don't think is that innovative, but it was kind of radical at the time. We went to the elder board and we said, we'd like to start inviting our friends who don't go to church. And they said, awesome, we'd love that. And we said, well, we don't think they'll come to the Sunday school class in the basement with the bad coffee. I said, well, what are you proposing? And so with their blessing, we moved that Sunday school class out of the church a mile down the road to a tavern, the Mount Bethel Inn. And that's when it was first called Liquid. It was Mount Bethel Inn. It wasn't like a tavern, like, we're not serving beer on Sunday morning. I know everyone's like, oh, I get it, Liquid. We were like, well, Jesus calls himself the living water. We think church should be refreshing. And we kind of used the John 4, Jesus meeting the woman at the well. He went out into the community to meet people where they actually ate and drank and lived and had honest, open conversations with them. And that's when God did something pretty amazing. That went from 40 people to 100 people in a couple months. And then it was 200 people. And Colleen and I were, we were volunteers at the time. And the Baptist church was like, that's awesome. Now they're going to all graduate, right? And they're going to come back to big church. That's what they called it.
They called it big church.
Called it big church. Mm. Now this was the great,
That's what we called it when we were kids.
Yeah.
Right? And that was a little bit of the mentality. It was a little bit condescending, like, oh, big church, once they grow up out of this liquid phase. And we also used liquid because we felt like it was a metaphor. It was a much more fluid approach. It wasn't as formulaic and program driven. It's meeting at a tavern. But the great moment came when Colleen, and I'll never forget this. Callie, you can ask her about this. There was a Sunday morning where what would happen is we had 200 people there, and we started adding music, and it became more of a message because you can't facilitate dialogue with 200 people. But people sat in table rounds, and so it was very dialogical driven. There were fireplaces. We served, omelets or whatever it was. We had a friend who has a keyboard. Why don't you play some music? And after that, it would be at 9, we compromised, 9:45. When it was over at 11 o'clock, so it was, hour 15, it was over 11 o'clock, I had to change out of my T-shirt and jeans and put a tie and sport coat on, and Colleen had to put her dress on, and then we drive a mile up the road to big church. That was our tax that we had to pay to reach our generation. And so then we would go into the 11:15 service at big church, right? Shake hands, hand out bulletins, go through the program, the liturgy, all of that. And there was this moment where we're in the car and we're literally getting changed in the parking lot. I'm putting my suit tie on. And all of our unchurched friends are in the tavern having brunch. They're like, hey, let's have salads and mimosas. And Colleen and I looked at each other and I was like, do you feel the way I feel? She's like, I'd rather be here with our pagan friends than go back to big church. And I said, me too. And that was kind of the moment where God changed our heart and gave us a vision to create a church for people who maybe didn't grow up in the church, don't have a background in church. And they may have given up on church. It might be over church. That was a big group too who we were reaching. People who had dropped out, but they hadn't given up on God yet. And so that was kind of when we named it Liquid. We formalized it. I left the staff of teaching English at Summit High School, joined the staff of Millington Baptist Church.
Oh, so you joined their staff.
Correct.
Okay, so how did they feel about you being on staff and having this kind of sub-church over here?
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, and no seminary degree, the whole thing. There was like, wait a minute here. That's kind of not how the Baptists roll. But they said, but there's something happening here. I mean, there's 200 people coming to this thing. They're like, can you take an offering? But, we said, hey, we're reaching people, with the love of Christ. And so they got on board with that. So I left teaching, but came on staff, and it was very interesting. I again, now that I'm in my 40s, I can't thank Peter Pindell enough. He is the senior pastor. He's now retired. He is my spiritual father in the faith. The amount of bullets that he took for us to allow this to happen, Liquid would not exist were it not for his vision and his leadership. And, trusting somebody probably didn't have the right attitude, didn't have the formal training, but, had a heart and to reach his generation. And so he empowered us. And so, Callie, we outgrew the tavern, and we said, what's the next obstacle to reach the next generation who don't go to church? And we said, you know what? The time is terrible. 9:30 is terrible time to introduce anyone to anyone, let alone Christ for the first time. So we moved back into the church at night. And that's when we started our first official Sunday service, or worship service. At that time, we called it like an outreach or something. And that was a big battle, because that sanctuary had been used for 150 years for a Sunday evening service that was sparsely attended, right? It was about 9 people, mostly folks in 60s, 70s, who was just kind of tradition in the rhythms of what they did. But we said, hey, what if we could come in and bring these 200 young people, and we'll have a band? And it was like, no, what do you mean band? And, we had the whole worship wars, drums, and, we lit candles on the stage. We turned out the lights. We turned the volume up. And some people in the morning said, what's going on? This Liquid cult. We saw people outside the church with motorcycles, and some of them were smoking. And, some of the gatekeepers on the elder board, had some problems with that. But to his credit, our senior pastor, Peter Pindell, said, praise God. We're reaching a new generation, and this has to be a new kind of church. And so he and I were really shoulder to shoulder, and he mentored me, but also allowed us to have this beautiful little incubator inside a very traditional church. So Millington is still very traditional. If you went today, it looks very similar to when it looked when I first came on staff in 2001. So Larry, that's a little bit of the backstory. When people say, this is incredible, Liquid started, 2007, look what God's done in 10 years. I had a baking time of 6 years before that, ministering on the staff of Millington Baptist Church, kind of as this church within a church. And because we were doing our own worship services, we started our own small groups, our own discipleship model, and we basically had the protection of the larger church, all the stability and resources, but we were incubating at the time. And he gave us the freedom. I made a lot of bonehead choices, things I would never do today.
But you couldn't have gone right from how important was the incubator? You had a successful Sunday school class. Then you moved it to the tavern. Are we frozen?
No.
Without our incubation time. And that's the part, it's funny. So, I just got out of a meeting where I just said to our staff right now, I said, hey, I don't want to wait until I'm 65. I've got my chips now. I want to spend them. How do we create Liquid for millennials, Gen Y and Gen Z? Because that is a tectonic shift. Gen X is statistically, it's just a blip demographically. But, I was reading this thing. I was reading on vacation for break here, this one. Not everyone gets a trophy.
Yep.
How to Manage the Millennials. Excellent, excellent book. And so I'm having our whole staff read this, because more and more we're having now 20-somethings on our staff. And I was once 20-something and knew the cultural reference points, but it's a whole paradigm shift because these guys are digital natives.
Yep.
Right? They've grown up on social media. And so whereas for me, it was innovation that I was using movie clips in my preaching. Well, now we're how do we use live polling where people are texting from their phones? I still like some of the more classic hymns. And this is funny, Callie, you may not have known this. I think it was the week you were visiting. So we move in here and into our new building, and we kind of have this countdown to worship, 2-minute countdown.
Yeah.
And they used to play kind of contemporary Christian music and with a lot of video, what was cutting edge when we started Liquid. And so I'm literally backstage talking with, one of our pastors about how we're going to do the communion thing. And I hear this dance music coming from I'm like, what is going on out there? Somebody has electronic dance, EDM on, or whatever it's called. And I come out there and there's this haze and EDM happening, and I was very uncomfortable with it. I said, well, we'll talk about this Monday. So I get in there on Monday to our service programming meeting and say, what happened? It turned into a club at our grand opening. And our millennial worship leader says, yeah, well, Tim, you said, could we sing Amazing Grace? Because you were like, hey, let's throw a rose to the 60-somethings. I want something to recognize. I thought, why not throw a rose to the millennials? And so I played Marshmallow. And I was like, what? What song is Marshmallow? He's like, no, that's a DJ. I had no idea. And it was this fascinating moment where I realized if we're going to do for my kids what Millington Baptist and Pastor Rendell did for my generation, Gen X, I'm going to get more and more uncomfortable on Sundays with some of the decisions that are being made. But it's uniquely my role as the senior leader to not only give permission, but empower them to make some calls that make me a little uncomfortable, but are speaking the language of the hearts and minds of Gen X and or Gen Y and Gen Z, not just Gen X.
I am fascinated by this concept of leadership in this model that you have, Tim, because I think in Javier and Larry Hoppin, I think that's one of the questions that the bishop and the diocese are really putting out there, which is what is the model of leadership going forward? And Javier, do you have any specific questions about that? I mean, I can obviously ask some, but you may.
No, I do, and I ask it also because Bishop Beckwith has been asking this question, but I ask it really from also my role as a dean of a seminary, and I'm thinking to myself, we are wrestling every day with what is it that as all of these cultural shifts that we're experiencing are taking place, what are we actually training people for, right? I mean, we're so set in how we've always trained clergy and how we need a radical shift, which is what we're trying to bring about. And I wonder if you can speak to that. Well, as you're looking for people to join your team, what is it that you're looking for? What qualities do they have? What kind of knowledge base do they need? What kind of, what is it that you, what criteria do you use as you're kind of putting your team together or thinking about how your own movement is going to grow and expand and shift?
Sure. Yeah. So that, again, this was a paradigm shift from the church I grew up in, because there was a very linear formal training model that one had if you were going to go into ministry. And, it was even a question like, wow, Tim went to Wheaton, but his degree was in English. It wasn't Bible and theology. He doesn't have his MDiv. And are we going to let him? Well, it's a Sunday school class. And that was kind of how, that went. Well, it's funny, at Liquid now, fully 2/3 of our staff didn't have formal ministry training. So we have about 100 people on staff, and only about, I would peg about 30, maybe 30 of them went to seminary in a formal capacity or had some sort of undergraduate biblical training. What we found is with Gen X, particularly now the millennials, even more so, the old paradigm was, it was like, you ever see like Rick Warren's baseball diamond model, right? Believe, belong, become, whatever it is. Basically, the idea was the journey to faith is very linear. It's like baseball. So you go from home plate to first base. You believe. You say, I'm going to become a Christian. Then you go from first base to second base. You say, I'm going to belong to a group of believers. That is, join the church. Then you go from second base to third base. I'm going to now go through the doctrine, learn all the curriculum, the content, the denominational distinctives. And then maybe, if you stuck it out long enough, you could go to home plate. You get to score the winning run, and you get to go on missions. You can go serve the poor, go dig clean water wells in Africa, whatever. We found it's the exact opposite with the millennials. They're like, they want to dive first, head first into third base. So one of the things that we're finding, like people will do even before they come to Liquid, is they'll come serve at an outreach. So for instance, in Christmas, we had, whatever it was, 6,000 people at our Christmas Eve services. But we had 4,000 people help pack meals for families in Puerto Rico, hurricane victims. And of those 4,000 people, 2,000 of them didn't go to our church. They were coworkers at Verizon or next door neighbors who go to the yoga class or have play dates. And so a lot of reaching next generation, they just want to get involved before they have any training or understand even some of the things that we used to use as gatekeepers, as filters. Like you can't serve the poor until we know that you're completely aligned with our, theology of social justice. And most millennials are like, yeah, whatever, you can play your religious, scorecard game, but I just want to see if this is legit. And what we found is a lot of times they want to belong before they believe, before they align denominationally or theologically. They want to belong and serve and roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty. And so when we said yes to that, that was a philosophical shift. You know, Wheaton's a pretty conservative school. They're, you know, academically benchmark, you better be credentialed before we give you any control or say. We just said, you know what, let's experiment at Liquid. Let's lift up the gates and let everybody play. And instead of just creating chaos, it created tremendous ownership, because now people were getting invested in real life ministry, and that they realized, like, oh my gosh, I don't really understand the Bible myself, and I'm being expected to lead a small group. How do we do that? We said, well, let us connect you to some online training. Let's send some of our key leaders, you know, back to work on their MDiv. And we've done that along the way. But most people have come out of private industry. Most are from the marketplace, who never thought that their gifts had a place in the church. You know, we have a lot of people from the pharmaceutical industry, because it's New Jersey, people from Novartis or Merck, who were in their IT department. And they're just like, we never thought that my, you know, IT background could be used in the church. And we're like, the website is our front door. That gets more visitors than our church on every single Sunday. Our podcasts, you know, are double the attendance of what happens on Sunday. So yes, we need your gifts. So kind of removing a lot of those credentialed, you know, filters that have been traditionally in place have really opened it up and brought in a whole new swath of talent to the church.
Yeah, no, that I have to say, one of the things that was very interesting, Tim, you were talking about your site and the technology, and for the two of us, Andy and I were both, you guys, when they do the collection at the beginning, you can text, like there's like, or you can, is it a text? Like you can send a text to, you know, this particular number, and you can give your, and I'm thinking, okay, this is so different. Like, wow. But that really is the next generation. That's how they do things, is they pull out their phone, and they don't pull out the money from their money clip. I mean, they really do take a Venmo and be like, yeah, here you go. Here's $10, right?
100%. 60% of our weekly offerings come in online.
Yeah.
60%. That's huge. Our goal is to get to 75%.
Did you say 50 or 60?
60. I think it's 60.
Wow.
64%, something like that. Yeah.
Yep.
Online. And so we just started text to give. Because again, but isn't it funny, Callie, right, how from our generation it almost seems sacrilegious?
Well, what I love, you walked, and this is, I thought was so awesome, and I thought so healthy on some level, which I just, again, very impressed. Walk in at the beginning. It's like, hey, let's talk about the fact that we're going to have this weekend, this Saturday, I'm sorry if I get the details wrong, but this Saturday babysitting service for special needs kids, for parents with special needs kids. And it can be to just, you know, go shopping for Christmas, or you could just take time for yourself. And it seemed like you were aligning this service or this outreach with, hey, and you know what? We need you to contribute, and we'd love for you to give to this, and here are the different ways that you can give. But it was like so upfront, but connected to something concrete and real that was contributing back to the community in a meaningful way. And here's how this is going to make a difference, and these are the different ways you can give. And I thought, okay, so this is so positive and healthy that it's connected to an actual thing that you're doing. And it's upfront. Like, we can only do this if we're able to get whereas sometimes I feel like in the Episcopal Church, at least at Grace, it's always like so embarrassing. It's like, okay, everybody, like, yeah, just give your money. And, you know, there's no line of sight. It's not connected to anything. It's just like, now we pass the plate.
100%. Right? Yeah, that's the interesting piece, right? So you'll probably, even though it looks very contemporary, et cetera, you'll see there's still the same building blocks of a service, order of service. Oh, now they're going to be offering. Only we've taken it out and looked at that and said, how can we be intentional about this?
Right.
And say, you know what? It's only with your generosity.
Correct.
That we're able to reach 200 kids with Asperger's and autism. Many of you have a special needs family member. And everyone's like, yes. I said, let me show you a cool video and watch what your offering did last Saturday.
Yeah.
Play a 60-second video, and you show these incredible
Yeah.
stories that are typically behind closed doors.
Yep.
But now we're connecting cause to stewardship.
Yep.
Whereas I'm like you, when I grew up, it was like, oh no, here comes the offering, vague sense of guilt around it.
Yeah.
And everybody had to put in, a little bit of a guilt, religious tax kind of thing. Whereas we've made it, we're like, we want to be not only 100% transparent, we want to over communicate.
Yeah.
What giving does every single Sunday.
Yep.
And so people don't
Well, and let's be honest, what we do with the offering is we also have this beautiful, dramatic classical music that plays over it as a way of hiding what we're doing in the pews, whereas you're coming right out
Yeah.
and saying, listen, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. Here's the impact and here's how you can contribute.
100%.
And doing it up front. Like, it's not even like,
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
Back in like the 2/3 through the thing. It is like, hey, welcome. Okay, so now here's what we're doing, and this is what we could really use your contribution, and here's how you can give. And I'm like, that is so healthy and normal and right, because none of this is going to work unless people are contributing. It's not right. It was,
100%.
yeah.
And that's not generational either. The phone thing is yes, that's when we grew up, we didn't have phones, but it was always put away anything distracting.
Yeah.
Whereas now we encourage people, take out your phones.
Yeah.
Like when I say, open your Bible to the Gospel of Luke, you don't hear the ruffling of pages.
Yes, it was on the phone. Because
right?
I remember I looked it up on my phone when I was sitting there, and I'm like, that is so cool, because then you can bookmark it, right? Because
Yes.
I was like, you know what? I bookmark it, and you could look at it later if you wanted to.
That's a generational piece. But you see, like, I know you guys are. This is in confidence, so I'll keep it obviously anonymous. We had a generous family this past fall give us a check for $600,000.
Wow.
And they sit in the very, very back. They're older. They're at the top end of the boomer generation. And when they gave it, we were just blown away, incredibly thankful, grateful, humbled that they would consider doing that. And they say, I know you don't, we're not up front. We don't, sing on the worship team. We don't, but we are so thankful to know where our money is going. Every single Sunday, you guys stand up there and you say, and this is for Meals to Puerto Rico, and this is to help special needs kids. And we know, because our son and daughter are here, we hate the music. They were very honest. They go, we bring earplugs. But our son and daughter are here. And our grandson, as you know, has ADHD, and he's along the spectrum. And he doesn't just get babysitting. He is cared for one-on-one, and this is the best hour of their week. And so for that, we would give anything to that. And that's, I think, part of the part that isn't generational. I think there is something that people want to be part of a movement. They want something that's vision-led. They want to see lives change. And that's what we're in the business of, whatever the denomination, whatever church. We're changing lives. So why wouldn't we celebrate that every single Sunday and connect people's generosity, just as we do with not just their money, but their time, the volunteers of hundreds of hours. I think, Callie, you saw it with Andy. All of our, you saw our Sunday school classrooms.
Oh, yeah.
It's all 20
It's all young people. Yeah.
20 something. So there's a generational transfer happening there that older donor couple said, we want to invest in that because we not only saw our son and daughter going to church, their kids, our grandkids.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a generational stewardship that's happening too. And so that's the part where we don't want to just be a young person's church or just change the style of music. There's a philosophical change that needs to happen because everybody gets it. I know in November, I start getting the envelopes in the mail, right? Mm-hmm. Every charity is asking for your year-end giving. Well, we have 52 weeks a year to show people the difference their generosity makes when they serve, when they give, when they volunteer.
So let me ask you a question about going back to this leadership piece. So it seems to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that part of this leadership capability is to be able to have that community sense, that vision of community outreach and what is possible and encouraging that. Would that be a fair assertion? that would, okay.
Absolutely. The church I grew up in, the Sunday morning service was for really two purposes. We're going to sing, we're going to listen to a sermon. And then over here, there's some social justice folks. There's going to be people who have a heart for the poor or for feeding the homeless or whatever. There's other churches where we're just doing that, but then there's no real content. There's no real Bible teaching where you're actually getting instruction of how to parent. You're getting instruction how to have a godly marriage or whatever. And we're like, we want to hit all three of those on a Sunday morning. Because for some people, like that couple who said, we hate the music.
Right.
They got strike one. But they're going to put up because they know the sermon is going to be relevant.
Yep.
I'm going to be talking about biblical principles of, for a godly marriage. And this guy's like, well, I've been married 40 years. I could use some of that. I want my kids to hear that too. It's going to be relevant. But then their kids may be like, we're not in that life stage, but we're going on a clean water trip to Rwanda.
Yeah.
Because to bring clean water to the world's poorest, even if we aren't there yet spiritually, that it's a God thing, we know it's a good thing.
Yep.
And so that cause element is so powerful on Sunday morning. And again, I don't think we're doing anything particularly paradigm breaking. It's just that we said, what if we spotlighted those three things? It came about, the musical experience, the worship, the message, the music, the message. And then we had this mission, and that changes. We change the channel.
I like that. Music, message, mission. Okay.
All right. Go. Or song, sermon, social justice.
Okay.
Remember, I'm Baptist. I can make anything alliterate.
I'm impressed. I am.
And those are really our three core competencies.
Okay.
And as you saw, I think, Callie, and this, I wish you'd be happy to talk with Hosil, Pastor Hosil. She is our family pastor. She has created an extraordinary experience for kids. That's the opposite of when I went to church. When I went to church, it's like, how long is it going to be? I want this to be over. But we just consistently get from parents, you have ruined it for our family. Our kids on Saturday night, they're like, we're going to Liquid tomorrow. We're going to Liquid tomorrow. And then when we get here, they don't want to leave. They want to go home. And I'm like, praise God, right? Come on. That's incredible. That's amazing. So,
but I will say my observation is that the leadership model, though, is not just you, Tim Lucas.
No.
Leading the whole deal there's a lot of leadership trickling down, and the expectation is that there's leadership at all levels working. Yes. Is that true? Javier, I feel like you're trying to ask something and I keep talking. Did you have a question?
No,
Okay.
I didn't. But I did want to say, though, that, the three principles, the music, message, mission, could actually work in an Episcopal context, but you would have to add meal. You could still do the all four M's, but you would have to add meal.
Yeah, and maybe wine. And maybe wine, you'd have to add a W to that.
I assume that's part of the meal.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, but I think it's that model of leadership, really, it's not just you at the top. It is all the way down in all the different areas.
100%. We have a collaborative leadership model. I happen to be the senior pastor, but we have chosen a strengths-based approach to leadership. In other words, the church I grew up in, the senior pastor did it all.
Yeah.
You're going to visit me in the hospital. I'm going to, call you Wednesday night. You're going to lead the prayer meeting. You're going to visit the shut-ins. You're going to, serve communion. You're going to do the baby dedication. And you better preach a killer sermon on Sunday, by the way.
Yep.
And who can do all of this, right? None of us are Jesus. And so I think there's interesting plot points in this is that I burnt out early. That was one of God's great gifts to my marriage and our family, is that when Liquid was growing, it's all exciting, right? 100, 200, 300 people. And I was doing all of that, and we had no discipleship process, and it was just me. I was the only guy on staff at Millington Baptist Church. And so I ran the small groups. I preached the Sunday message. I trained everybody, leadership. I'm the guy who's having coffees with newcomers, and I basically burned out. Chase was, she was 5 at the time, and my son was 3. And so I have this incredible moment where I came home from the church office one day. So we started Liquid 2007 on Easter. And we were like, was anybody going to show up? 1,000 people show up. And then what's worse, they came back, you know. And so suddenly we went from 300 people at Millington to now there's 1,000 people when we launched out in the hotel, right?
Yep.
Because that was the other secret. The hotel space was interrupted people's conceptions of what church could be.
Yep.
They'd be like, Liquid, what is this? And it's like, just come and see, come check it out. And it made it very easy. The one next to the movie theater? Yeah. So people came. But I was doing it all. And so I kept telling Colleen, well, you know, once we get to Christmas, we'll be past that. Once we get to Easter, and I was kind of fooling myself. And so I came home, I'll never forget this, walked in the front door, and Colleen was sitting on our couch. And you know Colleen, she's a high capacity woman.
Yep.
Runs her own business, et cetera. And she was crying. She had, you know, mascara coming down, and she had, and I thought something happened to the kids. I said, what is it? And I walked over and put my bag down. And she said, no, I can't talk. I said, honey, tell me what's going on? Something happened? And she just goes, you love her more than me. And I said, what? You love her more than me? And I couldn't for the life of me figure out, like, love who? Like, who are you talking? Are you like saying I'm having an affair or something? What are you talking about? And she says, that church, that damn church. And somewhere in the distance, I heard a rooster crowing. Because I swore that was not going to be me. I'm Gen X guy. I'm not going to sacrifice my family on the altar of ministry. But here it was. I had been kicking the can down the road, and ministry really had become my mistress. And I, of course, had to repent, not just to apologize to Colleen, but make radical choices. And so we not only went to counseling, but we took a machete to my schedule. We said, there's only a couple things that only I can do, and that's preach a killer Sunday sermon, raise up new leaders, and be out one night a week. We said, well, what are we going to have to do that? And we said, we're going to have to hire a second person. And that's when Mike Leahy joined our staff, who's in charge of pastoral care. And now with 100 people on staff, we basically have strengths-based leadership. So we kind of use that Old Testament paradigm of prophet, priest, king.
Oh, that's right. You did. Okay.
That's our leadership model.
Okay.
So prophetic people are people, right, who are preaching the word, leading worship. They're good with crowds, communicating truth. But then you can draw a crowd, but now how do you care for people? Because people are going through divorce, their daughter's cutting, this one has an eating disorder, this one is going through depression. That's the priestly one. And so Mike Leahy, who is also on our senior leadership team, he oversees all of the campus pastors, 13 pastors.
Okay.
These guys are rock star shepherds. They're not communicators. They're not speakers. Praise God. They don't have to worry about the sermon.
Okay.
I worry about the sermon. I'm a teacher by nature. But all they do is care for our people. That's how we make a big church feel small. And then behind it all is the kingly leadership of Dave Brooks. That's our other Wheaton guy, Larry, who is our executive pastor. And he is a CPA by training. Again, he's a good example. So Dave is 61 years old. He was the CFO of a global gas company before he joined Liquid Church as our executive pastor. But he is a brilliant man in terms of he does our budget, our finances, our HR, all of our policies and procedures, all that stuff that I don't really have an aptitude for, because my job is the sermon and reaching the entire congregation. Mike cares for the people, and Dave makes sure that there's an offering taken, that we don't forget to take the offering. And he tells me 64% comes online, Tim. So you need to celebrate that. You need to champion that. We need more of that.
Do you have a distinction between certain positions are ordained, a lay and ordained leadership? Or is it just kind of skill-based? You have, you say there's something only you can do, but that's because you're good at it.
Yeah. So we have the kind of the skills-based kind of matrix, kind of like where you slide in organizationally. When it comes to ordination, all of our pastors are licensed by the state of New Jersey. So we're a non-denominational church, so we don't have like formal ordination. Some of them come in, like our second teaching pastor, Nathan Thompson. He is ordained by the CMA, Christian Missionary Alliance. And so some of them come in with credentialing. That's not a deal breaker for us, though, because we're like, we'll license you. So all of our pastors are licensed. Most of them have theological training on some level. I'll give you an example. John Cords. So he runs our Somerset County campus. He went to Taylor University. And so Bible was his undergraduate degree, which is fine. They're not preparing a sermon. They're not writing discipleship curriculum. We don't feel they need, that piece. Others, we do have some lay pastors who then we lead through a formal discipleship and spiritual formation curriculum that we have in-house.
And if they wanted to groom your replacement someday, how would they do that? Would they suggest, seminary or not necessarily?
I don't think necessarily. I think it's funny. I'm not a pastor today without two things. One, having grown up in that 110 person holy huddle. I don't speak of that in a condescending way. I know it would be easy to do that, but that was formational for me. That excellent, methodical, systematic Bible teaching every single Sunday, even though I didn't want to be there every single Sunday, was instrumental. I still draw on that to this day. And then Wheaton was really the place where they do a phenomenal job kind of integrating faith and learning. And so even though I was an English major, you're getting Bible and theology woven in through that. So there's a worldview piece there that I think is more important than the formal seminary training, where it's looking and saying, hey, all of creation is God's. Let's not just condemn culture. Let's redeem it. We're not going to reject it. We're not going to put up the drawbridge. We're going to redeem it. If people are watching Stranger Things, then I need to watch Stranger Things and find the redemptive thread and link that to the Gospels.
Very cool. Hey, Tim, it is 3:03 and we only wanted to take an hour of your time. So I know you probably have to go. Larry, did you have last thing you wanted to ask Tim or Javier?
That was good.
No, other than next time you're on campus, let's have coffee. Let's talk. I want to continue this conversation.
Oh, I'd love to, Javier. That would be great. Maybe once it moves up into double digits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Great.
Sounds good.
Tim,
Kelly,
thank you.
Absolutely. Let me know if there's other people on our staff who, as you kind of work through this process that you want to talk to. One of the things we love to do is share our learnings and our failures, of which there are many, many, many along the way. Even in particular, like in our family and children's ministry, they're doing things that I don't even understand and fully. And if you talk to Pastor Hosil, for instance, she's a wonderful Korean woman who has really built it from nursery all the way now through high school. And they're the real heroes of the story. So please let me know if you want to talk with any of them, and I'll make sure you guys get
Yeah,
connected.
I think that would be great. I will tell you all that my daughter is now kind of getting her way into the youth ministry that they have. And it's been she's loved it. So you're doing something right.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
Guys, Happy New Year to you
Thank
all.
you, Tim.
Tim.
Happy New Year.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bless,
Bye.
guys. Bye-bye.